For the past couple of weeks now, we've been talking about how all of us are coping with what reality has been handing us so far this year, primarily focused on how we've been responding to the restrictions, the rules, the limitations on our activities and things like that. And those turn out to be actually relatively minor issues compared to a lot of the real hardship that's going on out there, the hardship of unemployment, and actually the life-threatening nature of the virus itself, and then we have all the rest of the news that's coming to us from around the country. Personally, just speaking about the virus, I don't know of anyone who's even had it personally, and I think that's probably because Placer County has been having a very different experience from many other parts of the country and the world for that matter. Lots of people here have been struggling, I know that, but we've been really spared the worst of it so far. But then we add into the mix the rest of the news in the country here lately, and some of you might be wondering, well, what the heck is he talking about? It's okay to be happy, right? Well, I plan these talks out at least a month in advance, and I have no crystal ball. I was going to use the pandemic for contrast, and then we have what is nothing short of a lynching in Minneapolis, something that should never happen, and certainly nothing that should be even tolerated in the year 2020, but there it is. And then we have the response, the protests. The protests are perfectly appropriate, but there's been rioting and violence in addition to it. So in the face of all of that, the cries for justice and how do you talk about happiness? I'll tell you, I got up this morning and I was thinking, well, maybe I need to scrap this one. I wasn't sure what else I was going to do, but I thought maybe I need to scrap this one. Of course, that was before I went out on, Karen and I took our dogs out for a walk, as we do every morning, and we were walking around our neighborhood, and as we got around the block, we were walking down the sidewalk, and on the other side of the street on the sidewalk, I saw a black woman, probably about our age. She was walking towards us on the other side of the street, and she had her smartphone and her headphones in, and she was dancing. And I mean, she didn't just have a spring in her step. I mean, she was doing this elaborate step with a spin and a back step all the way down the block. And I'll tell you what, the dogs both thought that she wanted to play with them. I mean, they were kind of getting into it too from afar across the street. And I thought to myself, you know what? If she can dance, I can talk about happiness. Especially when we get into how we define happiness. So that's today's topic, and the topic is really for anyone who may be struggling with the news and are looking for a way to find some peace of mind and equanimity, or for those of us who have maybe been going through at least the past few months not struggling all that much and perhaps feeling guilty because you're not struggling all that much. And I think that probably covers just about everyone here, I think. So is it all right to pursue happiness in the midst of a pandemic, a disaster, and this monstrous act of injustice that's happened this week? Our Declaration of Independence says that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are fundamental, unalienable rights accorded to every human being. And if we're going to pursue happiness for ourselves, there's the corollary, which means that we want to try to guarantee it that for everyone else, to see to it that everyone else is free to pursue happiness. So it's a two-way street. It's a mission. It's a mission that we're on. And as I said, it's all a matter of how we define happiness. There's a very shallow and frivolous definition of happiness that we find in our pop culture, which certainly isn't appropriate for these times. The most common meaning of happiness, the definition we find, is it's a form of pleasure. Here's the most common dictionary definition. Happy, feeling or showing pleasure or contentment. Sorry, no pleasure or contentment in the face of all this news. And then we get some synonyms: cheerful, merry, joyful, jovial, jolly, jocular, gleeful, carefree, satisfied, gratified, buoyant, radiant, sunny, blithe, joyous. Probably doesn't sum up the mood of too many people right now. Doesn't exactly capture the national mood lately. Quite the opposite in some ways. Fortunately, there is another way to define happiness, which comes from a wonderful book we worked with back in 2017 called Happiness, A Guide to Developing Life's Most Important Skill by Matthew Ricard, who is a Tibetan Buddhist monk. This is the definition that we get from the book, and it's the best definition that I've found so far. Here it is. He says, by happiness, I mean here a deep sense of flourishing that arises from an exceptionally healthy mind. This is not a mere pleasurable feeling, a fleeting emotion, or a mood, but an optimal state of being. Happiness is also a way of interpreting the world, since, while it may be difficult to change the world, it is always possible to change the way we look at it. And that, of course, is the starting point for bringing about real and lasting change. That's where it has to start. A person who is in this state of consciousness, who meets all of the criteria of this definition, is going to want this happiness not just for themselves, but for everyone, and will be actively engaged in finding ways to enable more people to have that exceptionally healthy mind. I mean, we need that. We need people who are in an optimal state of being that's based on an exceptionally healthy mind, that's because they're flourishing, that they're on purpose in their lives. You know, even in the midst of all of this, Karen mentioned that we had the space launch yesterday, and while she was doing her meditation, Bob and Doug, the two test pilot astronauts on board the Crew Dragon, were at that very moment entering the International Space Station, where they were being greeted by a fellow American and two Russians in a demonstration of the kind of cooperation that is possible in the world, and that we also want to focus on and not lose sight of. We can do both. We can do both. I would suggest that this kind of happiness that Matthew Ricard talks about is going to be one of the keys in mounting an effective response to everything from pandemics and disasters to racism and bigotry. Based on this definition, it is most definitely okay to be happy, and this does seem to be right up our alley in Unity, doesn't it? Flourishing. That's another way of saying thriving, which is part of our mission statement. Legitimate happiness is a state of mind and being. Again, it's that inside job and isn't dependent on what goes on around us. Here's a little more from the book. He says, in brief, the goal of life is a deep state of well-being and wisdom at all moments, accompanied by love for every being. True happiness arises from the essential goodness that wholeheartedly desires everyone to find meaning in their lives. So that really ties into what we were talking about last week. Psychologists are suggesting that human beings have a genetic blueprint, that innate sense of essential goodness that Matthew Ricard talks about. It's hard to see sometimes, especially when the events of the world are bringing us these things. But it's something that philosophers and spiritual teachers have talked about for hundreds of years. Now, our Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore used a blueprint called the 12 Powers, which gives us a list of the things that make for our essential goodness, which is, again, the key to what Matthew Ricard calls true happiness. I mentioned last week that this is our system of virtue ethics. That's what it would be called in philosophy. And so if we build on these things, if we focus on these things, if we work on these things, that is going to be the foundation for creating the more just and peaceful world that we so desperately want to see right now. So we're going to go through the 12 powers briefly this morning, and when I teach the 12 powers, this is the order that I use. I use it because it's the easiest for me to remember. There's groupings, and the way they're arranged, it's just easier for me to remember. There is no official order or hierarchy that I know of. So for me, it goes like this. Faith and love, they're related. Strength and power. Wisdom and understanding. And then you have imagination, will, order, zeal. You can actually turn that into a sentence. Imagination, will, order, zeal. So you got those down, followed by release and life. So a quick overview today, and again for future reference, there is a summary of what I'm talking about. It's on my blog, which you can find on the main page of our website. So we start out with faith, which is commonly tossed around to mean believing something without evidence or believing something contrary to the evidence, as if it was some kind of a badge of honor, and that just doesn't work for me. I like to talk about faith as trusting what we know to be true. You see, even when we know something is true, and when we profess to the world that we know it and believe it to be true, we don't always trust it. And by that I mean we don't always walk the talk. So faith is about owning what we know, trusting it, and then acting on it instead of just talking about it. We can speak of love, we can speak of the unity of all humankind, and yet what do our actions demonstrate in the world? Do we trust that in every situation, or are we still suspicious, judgmental? Next is love. And in unity, we define love as a conscious choice. It's not a feeling or an emotion. Love is a decision. There's a song by Daniel Nahman, "Love is my decision." It's a decision to see self and other as one. We choose to open up. We choose to expand our circles of caring and compassion instead of pulling back and building walls and becoming ever more tribal, which is a problem we're having in our country lately. Moving on to strength. Strength is our ability to deal with the world from multiple perspectives. That requires a certain amount of effort and strength to be able to do that. Mental strength, mental discipline. To see and appreciate both the tangible and intangible sides of reality, to be able to see and appreciate all of the diversity in the world. It's our ability to be agile and resilient at the level of consciousness. And recently, I've heard an even better way of describing what is meant by strength in this context. It's called grit. Grit. That comes from a book called Resilient, How to Grow a Unshakable Core of Calm, Strength, and Happiness. That one's by Rick Hansen. Here's the definition. Grit is dogged, tough resourcefulness. It's what remains after all else has been ground down. So this is something I learned about recently, and I think it's something that we can add to our definition of strength in the 12 powers. Next we come to the power of power, which sounds redundant, but power is described by Charles Fillmore as our ability to put, it has to do with the written and spoken word. It's about how we make our ideas known, how we put our thoughts into manifestation. Plenty of people have lots and lots of big ideas. You might know a few people like that. They talk a good game and they have all sorts of great ideas, but they never seem to get anything done. The ideas never seem to get from the intangible realm of consciousness into the tangible and useful form that they need to be in the world. Some people are, as they say, they're too spiritual to be of any earthly good. They get stuck in the metaphysical realm, and it never gets manifest into reality. That's because the faculty of power, perhaps, is underdeveloped. It's something that we may need to look at and work on if we find that we have difficulty following through and making our thoughts reality. Wisdom. That's the faculty of judgment, discernment, and intuition. Wisdom is knowing how and when to apply our critical thinking skills to a given situation. We get knowledge through understanding. That's how we come to know what's true. And then we have to apply wisdom. This is where wisdom comes in. This is the important difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is this: knowing that a tomato is technically a fruit. Knowledge is knowing that tomato is indeed a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it into a fruit salad. All right? That's a good way of remembering it. And then we get to understanding. And I just mentioned that understanding is our ability to gain knowledge, to know that a tomato is a fruit, to analyze, to perceive, and comprehend the world around us as well as our role in the world. Understanding is an essential part of critical thinking, but as we see, it works best when it's combined with wisdom. Imagination. What would we do without imagination? It's a crucial component in creativity, and this is something I think that's unique to human beings. It also plays an important role in helping us to generate empathy and compassion, because imagination is what allows us to walk in the shoes of another person. We can imagine what it's like to be that person, and then to apply the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It allows us to create art and literature and music and all of those wonderful things. I mean, think about where we'd be without that. We might as well be cave dwellers without imagination. And then we move on to will. And the classic unity definition of will is the executive faculty of mind. Now, for you Star Treks among us today, Star Trek fans among us, and I count myself as one of you, I use Captain Picard from Star Trek The Next Generation as the perfect example of what we mean by will. It's our ability to be like Picard and say, make it so. Will is also an essential part of self-control, which we need. It's part of our ability to stick to a task, to keep a promise, follow a diet, anything like that. We require will. So that's the executive faculty of mind, our Picard quality. Order. Order is the ability to see life as a process where things need to happen in a certain sequence, such as mind, idea, and expression. That's an example of order. Order is about developing the patience and the courage, I would say, to let things unfold without a lot of pushing and anxiety. You know, often we're tempted to rush into the manifestation of something before we do the inner work. That inner work of carefully examining our ideas and bringing the rest of the powers to bear on the situation first. So we don't want to jump the gun and skip a step. Zeal. Zeal, that's all about our enthusiasm and our passion. Those are qualities that can keep us both focused and motivated. You know, everybody needs a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and if that reason doesn't fill you with a certain amount of energy and optimism, you might want to take a look at that. All right, release is something that is sometimes called elimination or denial. I like the word release better, and I think of it as our ability to change our mind, to change our way of thinking. Release is what makes it possible for science to work. When a scientific hypothesis doesn't match the evidence, you know, we don't try to change the evidence. Instead, we release the hypothesis and try something new. We release the things that no longer work for our best interest instead of lugging around a lot of useless baggage. And finally, we have life, which I think of as our ability to express the quality of aliveness. What is it that brings life to what we do, and how do we express that quality in the things that we say and do? It becomes an indicator of the degree to which we're aligned with principle or whatever reality we point to when we use the word God. And this is different from zeal. This is different from zeal. Life is having a reasonably clear answer to the all-important question of, why am I here? It's about having an awareness of our life purpose, of having a mission in life. Zeal is about the passion and energy that we bring to that mission, but first we have to be able to articulate it and express it so that it comes alive in us. All right, that's all 12. As promised, that was a quick trip through the 12 powers. I hope that we can use them as a handy checklist of the qualities, the traits, the attributes, the virtues that we can work on, that we can draw upon in order to bring about that legitimate and true happiness that is more than a pleasant feeling or superficial cheerfulness. And more importantly than that, they're the things that we can draw upon if we want to create a more just and peaceful world. It's something that we're going to need to carefully cultivate if we ever hope to counteract the various viruses and toxins that seem to be seeping into our culture. In a way, I guess we have to be the vaccine and do our work by example. So I hope these are some useful tools. And that's all for today. So we will take up our topic again next week.